Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Welcome to today's reading from Brilliant as the Sun, a retelling of Srimad Bhagavatam Canto 5, The Universal Order. We are reading from chapter 1, King Priyavrata's wondrous activities. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langhayate girim yat kripatamam vande Shri Gurum Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Hari Om Tat Sat. Verse 15. Brahma's stone was gentle but firm. According to a past association with the modes of nature, Krishna allots us our bodies according to destiny. Everyone's body will enjoy and suffer a certain amount of happiness and distress. None of us can either foresee or avoid the joys and sorrows due to us as ordained by Krishna. Therefore, we are best advised to follow Krishna's guidance, just as a blind man is safest when led by a sighted man. We will get the best outcome in life if we follow Krishna's instructions. That the safest course for a conditioned soul who still has material desires and identifies with the material body is to follow his varnashram duties. By the grace of my spiritual master, however, I have attained liberation from the bodily concept of life. Surely varnashram duties no longer apply to me and indeed may prove an encumbrance, an impediment to my spiritual progress. Just to give a quick recap, that we were reading how Priyavrata, he refused his father Swambhuva Manu. He refused his request of becoming an emperor. Now Narad, he has advised Priyavrata anyway. We know that during his time with him that spiritual life is much better than the material life, because that is one thing which is going to liberate oneself back to Godhead. Then Narad doesn't want to say much because Swambhuva Manu is asking. So Brahmaji is requested to come and speak, but actually it is Krishna's will that Priyavrata should take the throne and become the ruler of the earth. So we continue. Verse 16, Brahma said, a liberated person does not resent his bodily circumstances because he accepts it as the result of his own past acts. Unlike conditioned souls, however, the liberated soul does not identify with his body, just as a man who has woken from a dream does not identify with his dream body. He simply uses his body in Krishna's service, and thus his activities do not entangle him in further births in the material world. Priyavrata shifted uneasily. If I become king, will I have to marry and accept household life? Surely this is harmful to one's spiritual progress. Verse 17, Brahma replied, if you are actually self-realized, you are both self-satisfied and in control of your senses, in which case accepting a wife and if you are not, in which case, accepting a wife and becoming the emperor will not be a problem. If you are not self-realized and have uncontrolled senses, then even if you remain in the forest, you could fall down. Priyavrata's eyebrows raised. Really? Even here in my guru's ashram? Certainly, said Brahma. A person with uncontrolled mind and senses is like a man with 6 co-wives. Priyavrata smiled, imagining a man being pulled in 6 different directions by his demanding wives. Brahma had a point. There had been many elevated mystics who had fallen from the spiritual path just by hearing an apsara's ankle bells, smelling an attractive fragrance, or even by seeing 2 fish mating. Any of the senses can indeed distract an aspiring transcendentalist. He shivered at the thought. So we have heard these stories in the previous cantos as been reading through the Bhagavatam. as Priyavrata is recalling them, imagining them. My Lord, how can we protect ourselves from falling into material consciousness? Verse 18. Living as a brahmachari in the Guru's ashram trains one in the basic principles of renunciation, which are practiced and matured in household life. A person who follows the religious principles of married life is like a king in his fortress. From this position, he will conquer the powerful enemies of lust, greed, anger, and illusion. Once mature in his renunciation, he can again leave family life and live either as a vanaprastha or sannyas. The surprise was evident on Priyavrata's face. Married life will be a more secure fortress than my Guru's ashram. Verse 19, Brahma's melodic and perfectly enunciated words again rang out, delighting their hearers. I was describing the path for an aspiring transcendentalist who is not yet mature in renunciation. It is a different matter for you. You have already taken full shelter of Krishna, whose feet are like lotuses. When a bumblebee enters the opening of a lotus flower and drinks its honey, the petals fully protect it. The bee is undisturbed by the sunshine and other external influences. Similarly, when executing Krishna's command, Krishna shelters you. Therefore, on his order, accept the enjoyments of royal life and you will not fall into material consciousness, even amid worldly enjoyment. Verse 20, Priyavrata bowed his head. You are the spiritual master of the entire universe and you have removed my doubts. My Lord, I will do as you say. Verse 21, Manu's face lit up with relief. He respectfully offered Brahma prayers of glorification and repeatedly prostrated himself before the God. Narada and Priyavrata watched in great happiness. Brahma offered them his blessings and then mounted his swan carrier and rose to the heavens. In the dimness of early evening, birds raucously sounded their night chorus, but neither Shukdev nor Parikshit noticed. The king was curious to know why Priyavrata had been reluctant to assume the throne. His disinterest in wealth and power was sure a sign of his high spiritual attainment. Parikshit asked Shukdev what had happened after Brahma had convinced Priyavrata to become the emperor. Verse 22, Shukdev said, Swambhuva Manu had become almost hopeless about Priyavrata returning with him because the great sage Narad had advised him to remain a brahmachari. Fortunately, Lord Brahma came and fulfilled his desire. On the throne, Swambhuva retired from worldly life, which he felt was like a dangerous ocean of poison. Verse 23, although Priyavrata had no attraction for family life, he accepted it to honor the order of Brahma and his father. However, although externally fully engaged in worldly affairs, internally he was always meditating on Krishna. He always meditated on Krishna. Parikshit knew kings had to marry. Priyavrata could not have remained celibate and rule the world. Governing the world was for householders, which meant accepting a wife. He asked who Priyavrata had married. Verses 24 to 25. Shukadev said he married Prajapati, Vishwakarma's daughter, Barhismati, who bore him 10 sons equal to him in beauty, character, magnanimity, and all other virtues, and a daughter named Ujaswati. He gave his sons the 10 names of the fire god: Agnidhara, Idhamjiva, Yajanbahu, Mahavira, Hiranya Reta, Grihat Prishta, Savana, Medhatithi, Vitihotra, and Kavi. Verses 26 to 27. Kavi, Mahavir, and Savana were renounced from childhood and lived as celibates, completely controlling their senses. They were renowned as great self-realized saints. From their earliest years, they forsook sense gratification and continuously meditated upon Krishna, who is known as Vasudeva, the resting place of all jivas. He is the only refuge for those who fear material existence. So I always wanted to know what's the meaning of Vasudeva. I'm not sure, but seems to me, I will check anyway later on. Vasudeva, the resting place of all jivas. He is the only refuge for those who fear material existence. By constantly remembering him, the three princes became pure devotees who could directly perceive the Lord in their hearts, realizing their qualitative oneness with him. Verse 28, the king had another wife in whom he begot three sons named Uttam, Tamas and Raivata. Later, they presided over the third, fourth and fifth Manvantar ages. Verse 29, while his sons practiced spiritual life, Priyavrata ruled the universe for 110 million years. Whenever he took up arms, the opponents of the religion would flee in all directions. Terrified of his unparalleled prowess, although internally detached from worldly enjoyment, he appeared to be extraordinarily fond of Barhismati. With the passing of each day, their love seemed to increase. By her feminine behavior, she magnified his energy, and he behaved like an ordinary, henpecked husband. Still, his spiritual power never diminished. I shall describe an astonishing feat he achieved. Verse 30. During his reign, he became dissatisfied with the sun's orbit. For 6 months, the sun travelled on the northern side of Mount Sumeru, and for 6 months on the southern side. This created darkness for the side opposite the sun, and Priyavrata, for the benefit of the people, wanted to rectify that situation. He thus created a brilliant chariot which was like a second sun. Mounting it, he followed the sun's orbit on the opposite side of Sumeru, dissipating the darkness. Parikshit's eyes widened. You mean he became a second sun to light up the dark side of the world? How is that possible for any man? Shukadev said. He could perform this superhuman task because of the mystic powers he had accrued by worshipping Krishna. Astonishing! What else did he do? Verses 31 to 32. Then he drove his chariot behind the sun. Its wheels created trenches which became oceans, dividing Bhumandal into 7 islands named Jambu, Plaksha, Shalmali, Kusha, Shaka and Pushkara. Each is twice as large as the preceding one. The trenches filled with the liquid substances which became oceans, separating the 7 islands. Parikshit tried to grasp the enormity of this feat. It was almost unbelievable. How did he create successively larger oceans? He looked quizzically at Shukadev, who explained that the monarch had used 7 different chariots, each with 1 wheel, which became progressively broader as he went further out. Shukadev went on. The 7 oceans going outwards respectively contain salt water, sugarcane juice, liquor, ghee, milk, yogurt and sweet drinking water. Each one is equal in breadth to the island it surrounds. Priyavrata installed 7 of his sons as the king of each island. Later, King Priyavrata arranged the marriage of his daughter Ujjaswati to Shukracharya. They had 1 daughter together, Devyani. Parikshit sat in silent wonder. Priyavrata's achievements were quite incredible. Verse 35, Shukadev could understand Parikshit's mind. Such deeds are not surprising for Krishna's devotees, who can conquer the mind and senses, transcending the influence of hunger, thirst, lamentation, illusion, old age and death. What to speak of them? Even a degraded and sinful person can be liberated from material conditions by uttering Krishna's holy name just once. Parikshit nodded. It was true. Overcoming the influence of the material energy was the greatest accomplishment. One who could do that was surely capable of anything by Krishna's grace. Shukadev continued. For many years, Priyavrata ruled the earth with full strength and authority. Enjoying great worldly affluence, he always acted in full Krishna consciousness in compliance with Narad's instructions. Nevertheless, after many years, he felt restless with his apparently materialistic life. Verses 37 to 38. He chided himself for becoming addicted to sensual enjoyment, especially sex life, the deepest, darkest trap of material illusion. By Krishna's grace, Priyavrata experienced a sense of detachment. He divided his earthly possessions among his obedient sons. Leaving everything behind, even his beautiful wife, he returned to his life of ascetic devotion by virtue of his spiritual practices. He saw Krishna's pastimes within his purified heart. Verses 39 to 41. My dear Parikshit, there are many famous verses glorifying King Priyavrata. I will recite for you just a few. Only Vishnu himself could match King Priyavrata's achievements. He dissipated the darkness of night and with his great chariot wheel excavated 7 oceans. With rivers, mountains and forests, he created boundaries so that people would stop quarreling over territories. As a great devotee of Krishna and a disciple of sage Narad, the king considered the uncommon opulence he achieved because of his deeds and mystic powers as contemptible. So with this, we conclude chapter 1, King Priyavrata's wondrous activities, and next time we'll begin chapter 2, King Agnidhara. Thank you for joining. Hariam Tat Sat. Hare Krishna.